Okay, well, very good. Good morning. This is Tom Smith, and we have a couple of documents we want to review today to give everybody an update on the Altronic IIING and the Altronic IIING, and some of the issues that we have improved in recent months. Most of these, and I didn't realize how many we've actually shipped. The 5NGs, we're approaching almost 3,000 units in the last couple of years. So there are a large number of them out there now, and that has given us enough time to see some of the issues, with early production. And most of these have been high vibration applications that we have seen where we've had a few failures, and we've made some improvements, and those have proven to correct the situation. So just want to bring you up to speed on what those are. So the magnet holder gear, we assemble that at Altronic, and one piece assembly, only sold as that assembly, and we have made some improvements with them, and this is held in a fixture because when the magnet holder, which is the cup with the magnet in it, and you can see the magnet over here, that's very small, and when that is put on the fixture, that holds it centered around this circle right here, and then the gear is put on top of it, which is also held to that center, and then we are now installing that gear with screws that you can see that now they project through the bottom of that cup, and this is shown with the Loctite material being put on the outside, as well as the threads as it goes through the nylon material. Traditional Loctite is made for metal screws, aluminum, stainless, any of that kind of material, but that traditional red-blue Loctite does not work on nylon. So with this, it is certified and made for use with plastics. So this does a very good job at securing those screws. So the longer length, it's on the threaded portion of the screw. We also put it underneath the screw, and there's some new lock washers that go on there that actually have small teeth on the bottom side that lock into the gear, and then the screw is tightened and torqued. And so this complete assembly now is much better at staying together when you have these extreme vibration engines. And most of the other ones have held together just fine. It's just these high vibration applications, so it's been a nice improvement and been proven to work properly on the high vibration applications. The other issue that we've seen are the red storage capacitors on the board, and these, in fact, you can see a little bit of the white silicone on there. Originally they were attached with white silicone, and some of these have had, again, high vibration applications. We've had a few of them where they would vibrate loose and lose connection, vibrate to the point where they would fracture the solder points of the two leads on the bottom side. So we're now using epoxy on them, similar to what the epoxy we've used on other storage capacitors. Now this one on the bottom side does not have holes, so we can't apply the epoxy through the hole like we can on the 3NG board and some of the like 95 boards and such. So the method that we'll use on this is to secure it down with some epoxy underneath it, and then we're going to put a bead of epoxy around the periphery of it, which has again also shown to secure it down very well, and that should improve anything that goes into this high vibration type application. The Altronic IIING were originally manufactured with some of that white silicone, and there were only a small number of them that went out, and that was basically the right after the prototype type production. or some of them went out with that silicone, and we had a few failures of them, but since mid 2020, they've been manufactured with the epoxy. So the 3NGs should not have any of these issues, other than if possibly they were the early silicone applications and where they were in a high vibration application. So that has been addressed on the 3NGs and the 5NGs. It is being implemented as we speak. The upgrade instructions include provisions to measure the gap between the magnet holder and the Hall effect sensors now. And on the board, we have Hall effect sensors, and this is a 6-cylinder board, so there's at the top, in the other 5 locations around there. And this 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock position, these are exposed fairly well underneath the cup where you can access them. You use feeler gauges underneath there. So what we've seen, and we didn't see this in production at the factory because we are, manufacturing new back covers. Tolerances are all uniform, and when we install the boards and the cups, there was never any interference between the cup and the Hall effect components. But as we've seen, a lot of these kits, and most of them are being sold as kits, retrofit kits, upgrade kits, when they're being installed in the field, these back covers could be anywhere from the late 60s on up. So that's 50 years plus of back covers that may be being used as the core to upgrade. And with that, there are some tolerance stack-up issues where when the board gets mounted and when the gears and bearing is pressed in, some of those don't always get to the point where you have the proper gap between that magnet holder and the Hall effect components. So what we've done is to go a little bit backwards and use the shim washers that are underneath the gear like we did in the original or legacy Altronic 5s. And by doing that, we can ensure that during the assembly, you use the feeler gauges, you check the gap. If it's not correct, you pull the gear off and put the shims underneath there, just like in the legacy units, to achieve the proper gap, between Hall effect and magnet holder now. And previously, it was the rotor and the pickup coil assembly before, and that gap was commonly measured. So this is a very similar procedure. It's just that you have to use plastic feeler gauges so they're flexible enough to get in there and don't damage any of the components. Proper gap is 20 to 30 thousandths, and there's a company that we use all the time, McMaster Car. They're a great company to work with, and they you place an order during the day today, we actually get it by 9 o'clock in the morning the next day, so it's very efficient. They have a local distribution point here. But if you're not familiar with them, just Google McMaster Car and then type in plastic feeler gauges in their search, and then you'll come up with this group of plastic feeler gauges. And then there's a 20 thousandths and a 30 thousandths. They're yellow or orange, and they're 12 inches long, so you could actually cut them in half. You don't need it 12 inches long. They're a half-inch wide. You get 5 in a package for $9.15 or $11.08. And it's a very quick, easy way to get the proper tools to do this. The Hall effect components, and we had mentioned the easiest gap to measure is between those at the 4 o'clock and the 8 o'clock. And here we're measuring the ones at the 4 o'clock position. It was just easier to do just one on the pictures. But you basically put the gear on and use the yellow feeler gauge and make sure you can get it in there, and you can see how far the length has gone, and it's underneath and between them. And then when you try to put the orange one underneath there, it won't go. It won't slip in there. So you've got more than 20 thousandths and less than 30, and that's all good. So this is properly gapped installation. So if it were not proper and you couldn't get the 20 thousandths underneath there, you have to add the shims as necessary. They're 902-579, same shims that if you're rebuilding one, you may have had shims underneath there. You're probably saving them, or they're available as new parts. And all you have to do is stack them up until you achieve the proper gap there. The last item in this service bulletin are the grounding requirements. And we've seen some failures of components that are related to transients that are attributed to improper grounding of the back cover. And there are some differences between the legacy and this product, where the legacy units, if you didn't have the proper grounding, the components were not as susceptible to the transients. But with the NG and those improvements, we need to make sure that when you do the retrofit, that you properly use a wire wheel. And this is just a wire wheel on the end of a Dremel. And in this section, you can see the gloss on this ring where it's mounted, where the PCB is mounted. And through about 270 degrees or so, it's been wire wheeled, and it's a little bit dull, and all the oxidation has come off of the aluminum. And the oxide that forms on the aluminum is not a good conductor. And the conduction path is through these small rings. The ring goes all around that circle, and you have 3 points where you're selecting or securing it down to the back cover. And you want to make sure that you use a wire wheel and you clean this all off and make sure it's nice and clean, no imperfections, no oxide left on there. And you can see the difference in color where it's a little bit glossy here, and then here it's been cleaned in this circle and ready for the PCB mounting. The rest of this back cover had not been cleaned up, and there's obvious other contaminants, but for the purpose of this picture, we're really trying to just show how this section is being cleaned up. There is also a ground and heat sink area right here. That also needs cleaned up, as well as the seal, the screw that goes in there. So. The other thing that we want to bring to your attention is that the Altronic V back cover, there are, anytime you get into the 4 through 6 cylinder back covers, we want to have a ground wire from the back cover right back to the common coil ground, which is attached to the block, the engine ground, the earth ground, and that's imperative that you do that on the engine. And we mentioned that it may run initially with a 5NG, but then it may fail. And also on your test stands, if you start it up without this ground wire on there, it's possible for you to damage the board itself. It may go out to the field, it may run for a short while and then quit. But what we're finding when we get a lot of these back is that those components are damaged from some of those transients. So it's imperative, because obviously when we ground this circuit board to the back cover ground, which is through the ground stud or ground screw that goes right through that back cover, that's got to be taken back to the ground of the engine and the coils so the circuit is complete, and so that there's no possibility of any of these transients to damage components. So the ground of the 4 through 6 cylinder units, it's from that back cover to the coil ground, and it's imperative that you use that ground with the 5NG units. Altronic 5 units with 3 outputs or less are grounded by the D wire in the harness, and they do not need that ground. So there's differences between 5s, and if you're familiar with one and you think, well, my 3 cylinders doesn't have a ground wire on the back cover, well, if you look at the installation instructions, it does show that. It's shown that from the beginning with the legacy units. So be sure that your test stands are grounded properly like this with these NGs, and that the customers are aware of the requirement to add that ground wire if they don't have it before they ever try to start the NG. So that's the completion of this bulletin. Chuck did send this out to you late yesterday or early this morning, so you'll have those. They're already updated on the web, so those should be available to you as you see necessary. The other document that we've made some changes to is the service manual, and this is the NG, the 5NG service manual. And going through that, we just wanted to show you some of the changes that we've made. And no changes in the beginning there. But in the parts identification, you see that item 47 here, these are the shim washers. Those were originally not shown in the NG because we didn't envision them being required. But we've made that change. And when you go down to the parts list, you can see that item 47 has been added, the 902-579 shim washer. The other thing that has been added is down in section 6. Before there was only section 6.3 and it directly went into 6.4, but we've inserted this section in the reassembly of the driven shaft. And we talk about this. This was in the legacy, but we've made some changes in it to make sure that it applies properly to the 5NG. And we note that items, the shims 47 on the end of the shaft may or may not be required under the magnet holder assembly. We note that you have to check the air gap between the magnet holder and the accessible Hall effect components with the plastic feeler gauges. Proper gap is 20 to 30 thousandths. Add or remove shims to the end of the shaft to achieve the proper gap. D was always the same with a little bit of silicone compound on the gear. Installing the washer, timing decal, lock washer, and screw, but don't tighten it for the timing indicator. And placing the magnet holder gears aligned with the A Hall effect, which is the top vertical Hall effect. Some people, and some of those magnet holders, you can see where the magnet is, but once you install it, you can't always see it. Some people are putting a indelible black marker, a mark on the outside, so they can see that. And you line that up at the top center, and that's where you were to tighten down the screw so that the decal aligns with the red mark on the single red mark on the label. And when you put it all back together, you put that timing mark on the label, which is now A lined up with the magnet. You align the single red mark up with and put the back cover on with the coupling aligned as shown in the chart so that they're factory set. Gives you all those angles right here, which is no different than the original Altronic 5. So that's all that we've changed in there, just correcting it for the NG and assembly there. It was unfortunately omitted in the first variation of the service manual. Okay. Are there any questions or comments at this time?
Tom, it was an excellent review. Does anybody have any questions for Tom? I believe Matt Trina is on as well from the engineering side. If there's any questions, and Steve Perko as well. I know Steve Perko was very much involved in the 3 and 5 development and deployment. So you've got all the resources on here that can very effectively answer any questions that you have. Anything for Tom or Matt or Steve? Tom, one question that came in on the chat from Dustin was pressing the magnet rotor onto the bearing shaft. Dustin, maybe you want to add a little color to that question with Tom, if you can. Dustin, you want to reach out and talk to Tom about your question about the bearing? Going once, going twice. Okay.
Yeah, Dustin, if you can hear us, go ahead.
Yeah,
we can hear you.
I'm sorry. This is Matt Donham here. He came back in on the chat. He does not have a mic, but it appears it does not press on without heating up the magnet and cooling the bearing.
Hey, that's not something we've ever requested anybody do that I am aware of. And, that's a common way to put bearings in housings on a lot of different products. But I'm not aware of us requiring it here. So if the interference is incorrect, it would be good for Dustin to send an email to myself, and I will consult with engineering, and that way we can make sure that everything is the way it should be, because we don't want the interference to be improper. We want them to go together correctly. I know that they've looked at some of that, because some people have said that they're too tight. Some of them had cracked some of the magnets. There's a number of different things that, we've gone through and reviewed, but obviously if you're still having problems, something isn't right. So, Dustin, just reach out to me with an email, pictures, description, and we'll make sure we handle it properly.
All right. So, Dustin, you can just go ahead and send that note directly to Tom Smith, thomas.smith@herbiger.com, and we'll make sure we get any questions that you have sorted out right then.